Hello, this is Corey Samuelson with the Fit Stoic Podcast, episode 16. No authority higher than your choice. All right, thanks for joining me once again. So today is going to be chapter 10 of the Gymchiridion. And today we're going to dig into the prooresis, the faculty of choice, choices themselves, and habit, and how these all tie together. Begin quote. There is no authority higher than your own choice. You choose whether to eat the healthy snack when faced with the donut. You choose whether to get up when the alarm goes off at 5:20, even as you feel the fatigue. You choose whether to do one more set if your trainer challenges you. Make the choices consistent with your values often enough, and you will find the choices making themselves. Yet the choice remains. End quote. Epictetus had a very unique perspective when it came to what he considered to be the essence of the individual. And he considered this to be the prooresis, and that is the faculty of choice. Now what this means is that in essence, we are choice, and that is pure potential. We can choose anything, whether it be virtuous or vicious. Chapter 10 is all about that there is no authority higher. So for the Stoics, no one and no God could take away this ability to choose. This is what is essentially our own. This is the dichotomy of control once again. There are some things that are up to us or within our power, and there are things that are not up to us, that are beyond our power. And for Epictetus, the faculty of choice, our essence, who we are as individuals, is choice. And this is like the only thing that is up to us. Now, at the end of the quote, I wrote that if you make your choices consistent with your values often enough, then you will find the choices making themselves. And that was my way of saying that is habit. You start to make those choices, and then like walking through a field, you very gradually over and over and over again walk on the grass, and it creates a path through the field. And then if you walk that same path often enough, then that becomes the easiest path. That is what I meant. It's that you make the choice, and then you make it again, and then eventually it becomes the obvious choice. It almost becomes the only choice, although it isn't, right? But when the brush or the grass has been trampled, and then it ends up being a little bit of a dirt path, and the rest of the foliage has grown up, or become a little unruly, and it becomes easier to walk along that nice clear path that those choices, to use that metaphor of the path. So with the physiology of the brain, there's something called Hebb's law, and the neurons that fire together wire together. And that metaphor of the path is a way of thinking about that. So when we think something in our mind, it creates a little bit of a connection between the synapses, the neurons in our brain. But if we start doing that over and over, and we think that thought, or we go through that motion, learn coordination, athletic movement, technique, form, that kind of thing, these pathways in our brain, the neurons, they start firing more and more frequently, and that connection will then become a more well-worn path. And because the body is very much into homeostasis and find the path of least resistance, it will start to be not the only choice, but it will start to become the easiest choice, the most accessible choice. And that is what habit is. First, it takes a little bit of effort, it takes a little bit of conscious thought, but then eventually you'll find the choices making themselves. When they're good choices, perfect. That's great, right? But when they're not so good, when we have eating habits or habits of not going to the gym, or when we feel a certain level of fatigue, the easier choice is, well, I'll just skip the gym today, right? We have to be very motivated to get there. And when we are, hey, that's great. We worked out. But if we get to that certain threshold of fatigue, all of a sudden, it's a little bit easier not to go, right? And these are habits. And those are the choices that seem as if they're making themselves. But we, or our conditioning, right, when we were younger, have been trained, and therefore our brain has been conditioned to find those pathways in certain environments and with certain triggers. So that's the first thing that I want you to consider, is that even though the habits are there, we can choose in the moment. We just have to become conscious in those moments. Even though they feel or they seem or we experience them as, oh, it's already happening. These are choices that were made, and we just have to then become aware of those moments consciously so we can make better choices, or the choices that we prefer. So even if you have habits and non-conscious behaviors that kind of feel like they're just happening, they're still your responsibility. Ultimately, your habits are a choice on some level. And whether that level is merely, well, I just choose to leave them where they are and I just choose not to do anything about it, that's still a choice. So from a Stoic strength perspective, the way I put it is this: there's no authority higher than your own choice when it comes to your own experience. I just wanted to make sure that was very clear. Now we try, we do our best, we strive, we aspire to create certain and preferred outcomes. We try to be healthy. We try to, by choosing to eat well, we try to develop our muscle by choosing to go to the gym or, lift weights, wherever that happens to be, or do calisthenics. But the results of those choices are not ours to determine. Our body might not be up to the task. There may be other factors, genetic or whatever, environmental, right? But it's the choices. And then when it comes to our experience, if we're not getting the results that we want, then we choose how we respond to the lack of results or to the obstacles in our way, whether internal or external. That is where I really recommend that you put your focus. It's on that experience. It's on the choices of what things mean and what we can do with the circumstances and with the environment and with the factors that are involved. But always focusing down to that choice point in the moment. Now, when it comes to habit and habits that we're trying to change, those choice points kind of flip by very quickly, right? It's kind of like feeling hunger. You're trying to get some work done on the computer or whatever it happens to be. And all of a sudden you find yourself, you kind of become aware that you're standing at the fridge with the door open and you're looking at food, right? You have to realize that it's in those moments of awareness that is when we can consciously choose and not rely on choices that we've made in the past and created those pathways in the brain. We have to really work on a limited number of conscious choice points, what I call the moments of choice. So if we go back to there we are standing, we're looking into the fridge. That is the moment of choice. It's like, okay, no, I'm going to interrupt this now. And I'm going to say to myself, no, I'm not going to eat right now because I only eat, if you have a schedule of eating, we'll say, I only eat every 2.5 hours, right? If that's a limit that you put for yourself. That's the choice. And every time you find yourself succumbing to that those past choices that are now wired in the brain of feel hunger or whatever the triggers are, right? Boredom, frustration, anxiety, right? Whatever the triggers of eating, beyond the point of, no, that's not my standard. It's just like trigger happens. I want to eat. Mind goes into its mode of operation that has already been worked in. And then we come to, right? Oh, we're standing at the fridge. That's the moment of choice. And now you have to make a new choice. So a model that I came up with for myself and to help clients is something that I call the choosing self, which references the proeresis, the faculty of choice. I call that the choosing self. And then there's that part of us that is the conditioned self. And the conditioned self is all of the conditioning, whether we conditioned ourselves, we trained ourselves through choices, or it comes from our childhood, the influences from all of the information, the circumstances, the environment, other people's opinions that are constantly bombarding us. Just to keep this real simple, because I don't want this to be like super, super long podcast. But when you consider that the conditioned self is everything that we've been conditioned to think on a non-conscious level, right? So we've got the choosing self, which is pure potential. That is us in essence, as per Epictetus, the proeresis. We choose. There's no conditioning there. That is the choice that we have. And then we have the conditioned self. And that is what has been through training, whether self-generated or coming from outside, from others in the world and the circumstances. Here's the way I want you to look at it. The conditioned self has zero choice. It simply does what it has been trained to do, what it is conditioned to do. So if I use that example of being like standing in the fridge, when we relax our choosing to live up to a standard, because that's not something that we have conditioned yet, right? We may set a standard, a new standard for ourselves as far as behavior. I only eat every 2.5 hours. Then the conditioned self has other conditioning. And so all of a sudden you relax, you find yourself standing in the fridge looking for something to eat. Don't beat yourself up about it. That is just the conditioned self. It has no choice. But you can't make that part of yourself your enemy. That's what it's been trained to do. It's doing exactly its function. And whether it's what you want right now or not, it's always going to do what it's going to do. It's like, how do you, are you going to get angry that the rain falls, that gravity works? That's just silly. And it's the same with the conditioned self. It doesn't have the ability to choose, and it's always just going to do what it's been conditioned to do. You, as the choosing self, need to choose in the moments that you become aware that you have that choice. So when you kind of come out of a trance, we'll say, and if you're wondering why I would use such a word, it's because I am also a hypnotist. So I am very aware of the research in this area. And trance, although not technically correct, it's still, you can think of it as being an applicable word here. So you snap out of it, and then you have that moment of choice where you're conscious. Now you get to make a choice. And that choice is, no, I'm going to close the fridge here, and I'm going to live up to the standard of I'm only going to eat every 2.5 hours, and I still have 48 minutes to go. Okay, just an example, right? Trying to keep this simple. Having closed the fridge, you go back to what you were doing. In this example, it was working on a computer. And then that 48 minutes rolls by, and it's like, okay, now I will eat because that's my standard. Every once in a while, that conditioning is going to be triggered by anxiety, frustration, just a sensation of hunger. And that path through the mind that is a habit of the conditioned self is going to be triggered, and it's going to be like, oh, I'm distracted. Where's the food? And again, if you are making your new standard a priority in your life, then a new habit will emerge where you will become aware sooner. You'll become aware that conditioned self is going about its business. It can't choose. You, that essence of yourself, the pro-racist, has an opportunity. It becomes aware, and then it's like, I'm making a new choice. I'm being consistent with a new standard. And then slowly, over time, it takes effort, that pathway that is developing in your brain is becoming the new, easier path to take, until finally that is a habit. And that becomes the new conditioned self. I don't want to use the word program, because conditioning is not just like a computer. It's not like you just complete it and it's a new program and it never fails. It takes conditioning. That's why I use those words very specifically. Plus, it's about strength training and conditioning the body. And as we know, if we stop conditioning, the body has a tendency, very naturally, to decondition as well. So even when it feels, and that's why I made that statement at the end there, even when it feels as though the choices are making themselves, the choice remains. And we have to take responsibility for our behaviors, because on some level, we are choosing. We're either choosing to live up to a new standard, or we're choosing to maintain an old standard. I want you to also keep in mind that the conditioned self is quicker to respond. It's faster, it's stronger, it's more powerful as far as driving our behavior than our ability to choose. We have very small windows of opportunity, very, very narrow moments of choice. And that has to do, again, with the brain going with the path of least resistance. So again, that Hebb's law, neurons that fire together, wire together. Our patterns, our habits, and our paths of least resistance are always going to be an easier choice. So it does take effort. In summary, just keep in mind that there is no authority higher than your own choice. Acknowledge and accept that you choose your experience. In essence, you are choice, and that you have a conditioned self that can do nothing beyond what you and the factors of living have conditioned this conditioned self to do. If you keep in mind this very, very simple model, then you can learn to train a new conditioned self. So once again, that's just create a new standard. And then in every moment of choice that you have, when you become aware that this is the moment, when you're sitting in front of the donut and there's also an apple, that's when you get to choose. And regardless of the circumstances, regardless if, I'm so hungry, I could eat them both, right? That's a choice you have to make. And depending on what that standard is that you hold for yourself, that's not up to anybody else, you make the most excellent choice that you can in that moment. So once again, I hope this has given you something to consider, something to think very deeply about. If you would like a copy, a free PDF of the Gymchiridion, go to gymmanual.com. Thank you for listening to the Fit Stoic podcast. This is Corey. Whatever your situation, operate with excellence.